The transfer portal is finally closed, but not before several Utah football players entered it. What did it mean that so many players exited the portal? And what does the individual loss of each player represent? Which are the biggest ones? Which one will Utah be okay with what they've replaced with? Also talking about some recent recruiting updates, whether that be through the high school level where Utah saw a decommitment and transfer portal misses that Utah has had. We're talking about it all on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first view and listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time listening to this show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the biggest upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel new customers, and you can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by KSL Sports' Alex Napoles, who hosts the Saturday show and does a little bit of everything, it seems. So we always appreciate when he makes the time to come on this pod. And Alex, talking about the amount of transfer portal players that Utah had. Utah had 23 outgoing transfer players, which is obviously a lot. But what I want to do is narrow it down and talk about the biggest losses to the other ones, like, okay, Utah will be able to navigate these losses. But first, just when I read that number, 23, that actually did surprise me a little bit. It ended up creeping all the way up to 23. What did you think when you hear that number?
The number 20, it is a big number. And I would say it doesn't surprise me because, let's be honest, JT, this season just did not go the way that I think a lot of these players expected it to go. There was, missing out on a bowl, 5-7, only winning 2 conference games. I could see how that would cause some unsettlement inside the locker room. And so, no, it doesn't surprise me, but it does at the same time because there is a couple players on that list of players who are outgoing and players who are leaving that we probably thought we're going to be here for a while. Some of them were probably written on the wall, right? You look at Jalen Glover, Dijon Stanley, who didn't necessarily get probably enough playing time with Utah. And so those were kind of given. But then you do have some surprises of players leaving. I definitely thought Carson Ryan was a guy who was going to stick around. Cam Calhoun, obviously, going on social media saying he was going to be sticking around and then ends up jumping in the portal. So yes and no, because there are some surprises on that list.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a lot of surprises. Sure, some people are listening like, wow, 23, it's probably the most. It's actually not even really that close in the grand scheme of things. Arkansas and Oklahoma, 30 apiece. Utah's does not land inside the top 6, actually, for most players in the transfer portal for a singular program. So it's just crazy that this is the nature of the sports now, where you see so much turnover from each season. So what I want to do now, Alex, is I have organized those 23 players into different groups of how big the loss was. And I want to give your thoughts on it and see if anyone's missing. I have sound the alarm, major losses, and then just other exits that I don't think are a massive deal based on how things played out. Sound the alarm, like above all else, like this is a really tough spot that Utah's been put in because these players' departure. Keanu, Tanuvasa, and Cameron Calhoun, they get a tier to themselves. Utah has no one on the roster, in my opinion, the caliber of those two players. Smith Snowden, more of a nickel corner than an outside corner to me. That's why I'm saying that compared to the other outside corners and what Calhoun was able to do, especially like projecting him for this year. Tanuvasa was in a monster defensive tackle. To me, those are two massive losses. And honestly, I don't think Utah didn't bring in guys to replace them, really. They tried to, but no one even close to the caliber of those two players.
Absolutely. Those are the two. Yes, those are the two that are most definitely the biggest losses for Utah. Keanu Tanuvasa, being a sophomore, or heading into his junior year now, I guess, he was fantastic this past season for Utah. Not only because of what he did on the field, but, you saw some of the behind-the-scene videos that even Keanu Tanuvasa himself posted of him being a leader inside that locker room, losing that voice and losing that skill. It's a big hole to fill for the University of Utah. The same thing can be said about Cameron Calhoun, right? A guy who took advantage of an opportunity with a Kenan Johnson injury to come onto the field as a freshman, coming in and showing what he can do. And he became an invaluable piece to that defense halfway through the season. It's a big loss because I don't think there's anybody else in the cornerback room as far as underclassmen go, right? There's not a freshman or a sophomore that really stands out to me the way that Cam Calhoun did. Kenan Johnson, his availability is still yet to be determined for the upcoming season. He's I feel like has a lot of the skill sets that Cam Calhoun does, but again, he would be a senior, right? I don't see yet a player who is an underclassman who has the skill set that Cameron Calhoun had.
No, there's not one. I liked what I saw from Elijah Davis. He was a really good player. Kenan Johnson we're excited about. Utah's added other transfer cornerbacks. None of them to me performed at the level that Cameron Calhoun did, and obviously losing Maivon. So it's just a massive hole in the defensive backfield, just like Junior Tafuna not being back as a D tackle. Speaking of defensive tackles, moving into our major loss category, Samote Pepa, would he have started next year? I do think he would have. I think it would have been Aliki Vaimaki and Samote Pepa, and now you get to the David Votu, Dallas Vailaki. Like, those are good players, but not as proven as what Samote Pepa was able to do at the D tackle spot. Carson Ryan, another projected starter for Utah. You could say you have Landon King, but that's still a guy who we thought was at least one, if not the second best tight end on this roster. And then Jack Bomeister, the punter, goes down to Texas instead. All those guys to me can be replaced, but they are definitely losses because they were projected starters.
Absolutely. They're losses, like you mentioned, just because they are projected starters. Heading into the next, like I mentioned, Carson Ryan was a guy I thought was going to stick around. I thought it would be the opposite situation, right, where Landon King hops into the portal and Carson Ryan decides to stick around. But instead, it's flip flop, which we saw what Landon King can do, and I don't doubt that Landon King can potentially step up and be the next big tight end for Utah, because that's going to be a big position that's going to be needed filled in next season, right? Obviously, no more Brant Keithy. Carson Ryan jumps into the portal. Now there's going to be a hole there to be filled, and I think Landon King has the skill set to step into that position and be successful. You look at Samote Pepa, who I believe it was his sophomore year, maybe, where he came in for a couple games.
The 20 season was he never quite got back to that level.
Yes, probably. It was probably that year where we saw him come in. We're like, hey, like, who is this guy? Like, keep an eye on this guy for the future, right? And it would seem like it was going to be a position or a possibility for him to be a starter at the position alongside Keanu Tanuvasa heading into the season. But now, with what we saw last season and what we saw with the depth chart, those were probably going to be your two starting D tackles, and you've lost both of them to the portal this offseason. That is going to be a huge hole for Utah to fill this coming offseason.
It is going to be a huge hole, and something that you got some guys in the interior of in the program that you're like, hey, we've got these guys, they've been here a few years, but when we haven't seen them do anything, we just can't be like, yes, we're locked in, we're good. And I know for the defensive tackle spot, people will be like, oh, Utah has a history of developing good defensive tackles. They absolutely do. I can't remember a time they ever lost a Junior Tafuna, Keanu Tanuvasa, and Samote Pepa all in one season. And even Aliki Vaimaki, right? He's coming off an injury, and we saw him a little bit late in the year, and he looked fine, but that's still like, it was a limited sample size. So there's questions there. Next category, losses. Players that were contributors that is disappointed to see them leave. But I also feel like Utah's already replaced some of them, or I project Utah to be fine without their departure. And several of these players could still end up biting you, it could end up being a huge regret that they left Utah and that they're thriving somewhere else. Mike Mitchell, the former 4-star running back, he was Utah's number 2 back, was really a freshman last year, so he's got a ton of football and a bright future ahead of him. Same thing for Dejon Stanley because of his athleticism. John Randall never saw the field, but all three of those guys former 4-stars. Anthony Woods, another running back that Utah was able to land. And he was a guy he didn't get to play because of an injury, but he had a lot of success at the FCS school, Idaho. Shout out the Big Sky. Tayshawn Lyons, a very productive receiver in high school, earned a 4-star recruit. Didn't really work out and materialize at Utah. CJ Jacobson, a high recruit, as a tight end as well. Brandon Rose, a backup quarterback who had a chance to do some things. Keo Akana now at UCLA. Jalen Glover, a backup back. All of these guys are in this category. So we see Sione Fotu being another one on the defensive side of the ball. These players all contributed. It's disappointing to see them go because they did contribute, but I feel like Utah has replaced pretty much all of these players already, or I project them to already have like a incoming transfer or an up-and-comer that is already going to take their spot.
Absolutely. When you mentioned you're reading off that list, and obviously the attention turns to the running backs because the large majority, if it are running backs, it's unfortunate to lose a guy like Mike Mitchell and I think Dejon Stanley because they are on the younger side. I feel like they still had a lot to go as far as developing goes. It would have been fun to see them develop here with Utah. It would have been fun to see them grow here with Utah. Unfortunately, they've decided against that, and that's fine because I mean, Wayshawn Parker is coming in from the transfer portal. There's a couple other Rogers is coming also through the transfer portal. Those are two guys that I think Utah fans can be excited about as far as transferring into the program. And so those are holes that I think can easily be filled through the guys. Everybody that you just mentioned are guys that can be filled with the guys that have already been brought in through the transfer portal by Utah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And you mentioned Wayshawn Parker. There's several other running backs. Utah's already bringing in some high freshman linebackers, 4-star guys that we're really excited about there. So there's other guys waiting in the wings to get Levi and Demooney back, where I feel good about the depth to replace those outgoing players, hence why they're losses still, because I think they can be good players. But Utah is already going to be okay without their departure, in my opinion. Other exits, Sam Heward, who actually went to USC now, so surprising one there to see. But look, we didn't get to see Heward the last time he was at a P4 program. When it was Power 5, it did not work out well. Damian Alford did not work out at all. Micah Pittman had opportunities. That one didn't work either. Josh Calvert, another guy who earned some playing time, and all the other Utah football players would fall into this category as well too. So these are guys, as I mentioned, that, hey, I think it was just a good decision by both sides. It just never materialized the plans that Utah had for this last category too. So that's where the other exits guys fall into here. But transfer portal players were not all that Utah missed out on. I want to talk about a few. These are players we saw that left Utah. I also want to take a moment, though, to talk about some players that decided not to commit to Utah through the portal, and even a decommitment in the recruiting world. We're going to be breaking down that in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Rocket Money. Rocket Money has your back. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year while using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is that subscription tracker. I mean, it's so easy to forget about all the services we're paying for today because it seems like there's a billion of them. I've used to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals features, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. You can go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. All right, Alex, keeping this episode moving. Now want to talk about a decommitment. That's right. A little bit of high school recruiting talking about today. Utah saw wide receiver Tavian McNair decommit for them recently, a 6'2", 180-pound receiver. He was a 3-star recruit out of Centennial High School in California, the 92nd ranked receiver in the country, the 55th overall player in the state of California. And he had several other offers. And look, he's not going to be coming to Salt Lake City. I think some people will be like, well, what happened behind the scenes? I think the truth is, so often players choose a place because of the coach relationship. Alvis Whitted is no longer at Utah. And I think in large part because of that, and he said that in his statement, he thanked the coaches and Coach Whitted who recruited him and then said, I'm going to be, pursuing my commitment others. So I dial this one down more to that. Could Utah's lackluster passing game absolutely play a role in this? Yeah, but I said, Alex, so often players choose a place because of the coach. They don't go just because it's like, oh, I love this program. It's actually a guy McNair from California. So I really boil it down to that rather than like, oh, a bigger problem with Utah.
Absolutely. And I think the timing has a lot to do with everything. Had this decommitment happened before National Signing Day, or even before the news was released that Alvis Whitted was no longer going to be with the part of the program, that's a different conversation. But the fact that it happened after National Signing Day, and it happened after the fact that the news was that it was announced that Whitted was no longer going to be a part of the program, that makes sense, right? It seemed like he wanted to come specifically. It's possible he could have wanted to come specifically for one of these specific coaches. That specific coach is obviously no longer with the program. And so because of the timing and because of how everything that happens, it leads you to believe that this was potentially I wanted to come play for this guy. He's no longer there. My recruitment is now open type deal.
Yeah, and even if it was because, hey, Utah's passing offense wasn't good, Utah has addressed that issue by making a change at offensive coordinator with Jason Beck being hired, and they've already brought in several receivers through the portal, added a few guys through the portal. Obviously, the most recent one coming from Wyoming, but then you also get a guy from New Mexico coming on. You got the guy from Mississippi State, not mentioning Darren Zipper and Zacharias Williams, both of whom contributed, and I expect to make a couple plays next year. So Utah's already made strides to upgrade their passing attack, but not all of those strides have been successful because Utah also tried to add a couple of transfer portal receivers. I think the most disappointing one that we saw Utah miss out on was Omega Blake. This is a guy I was really excited about coming over from Charlotte, had great intangibles, 795 yards, 9 touchdowns, and just good height, size, speed for the position. So seeing him go to Arkansas obviously hurt a little bit too. Carlos Hernandez is another guy. Steve Bartle had a great report out talking about the visits that Utah was trying to have a couple other guys up to campus recently. And they did have Hernandez out to visit. He had some production with the Cougars, but he's going to follow his coach, Jake Dickert, out to Washington State. Then you look at another guy too, who, yes, Desmond James, Utah's still in the running on, but he already visited Utah, and now he's got Mississippi State and Cal coming up later this week. Steve Bartle reports in the story on KSL Sports, so that I'm concerned about Utah's ability to land him there. And then you have Sterling Buckleter, who ended up committing to Wake Forest too. So Utah still missed out on some receivers. Overall, I feel good about the receiver room, especially Alex, if Dorian Singer can come back. But getting a guy like Otto Tia in here is big. The focus of this offense is going to be the running game. Would I love to have an elite receiving core? Yes, but I feel like there are several guys capable of stepping up who did produce last year that I'm optimistic about this Utah receiving core. I don't know if there will be a guy as good as Dorian Singer was, but I think the overall depth, they will be better and just more well-rounded this year.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be optimistic about, but I think until a ball is snapped, until we see the offense go out there for the first time in August, I think there's still going to be questions of at the wide receiver room, right?
Yep.
Because you lost a lot of players in as far as the wide receiver room goes. Mm-hmm. There's still the limbo about Dorian Singer, but if he can't come back, obviously he's a senior. He's going to have to move on if he can't come back. Money Parks, another senior. There's a lot of upperclassmen and more experienced players in the wide receiver room that will not be back for Utah next season for one reason or another. Otto Tia, Justin Stevenson, a couple of the other pickups through the transfer portal, Whittemore. I think they have the skill sets to be successful. However, that question will still remain: is how good is the depth going to be at wide receiver? And I think right now where we stand, that's probably the place I have the most questions about. You obviously pick up some good commitments in the quarterback room with Devin Dampier coming over from New Mexico. Wayshawn Parker and Rogers look to be solid running backs. So those I'm not concerned about. The concern for me is at that wide receiver position. So when I hear that, there's a couple of these guys like the guy from Washington State who decide not to commit to Utah, that just kind of opens that question up for me more, is how is this wide receiver room going to look next season for the Utes?
Yeah, if Dorian Singer can't come back right now, I'm going to go with Otto Tia as the number one. I think Davis, the New Mexico receiver, he'll be your number two guy in the slot. And then I look at Darren Zipper or Zacharias Williams, but that's without also mentioning the player Utah just added from Wyoming, Stevenson, as well as the receiver from Mississippi State. So I like that there are some competitive guys in here that can make plays. We are banking on upside. Outside of Tia and Davis, no one has really produced at a high level. Even Stevenson, its potential. Zacharias Williams, Zipper, each kind of only had moments or a game on the year. So who's going to step up? Who's going to emerge on the outside? That's a big question for Utah. And I am excited to see. We talked about Landon King a little earlier. I think he's going to play a big part in this passing game too. So excited to see what Jason Beck's offense looks like in 2025. And we are into 2025. So the Utah football team is back to work. That's right. Earlier today, it was announced that quarter one is underway, which means that the start of winter workouts have began. I also love that Tao Johnson was the one picture for the start of winter workouts. Coming into this year, I thought this was the chance it could be Tao Johnson's last with Utah, or I at least thought he would probably be a little better than he was just because he had some tackling issues. I thought he was really good in coverage, but he struggled to tackle a little bit. And I think that's part of the reason you see him not get more NFL interest, but he's a big addition to get back. And Alex, honestly, it's just crazy that like this starts now. The journey leading up to Utah beginning their season in the Rose Bowl against UCLA started on all the way here in early January.
Absolutely. It's awesome to see, but at the same time, this is the time to get into that shape, to build the muscle, to get your body right in the weight room in the off season, to beef up if you have to for certain players, right? I remember, when the winter workouts during like high school football, those were always the worst because it was just you wake up, you go to classes, and then it's just gym for the next 3 to 4 hours. You were just in there working out, pumping the iron, and getting your body right. And so sometimes it could be grueling. But again, these are college athletes, and it's going to be exciting to see. It's exciting to know that the work is already being put in to make sure that next season is better than the previous year.
Yeah, and they're still adding to this roster. There's more guys that are going to come on. Alex, I just talked about, I'm really fired up about Tao Johnson coming back. I feel like you lose Alakai Gilman, of course that hurts, but Tao I felt like was fantastic. I think Rabbit Evans is also going to be really good for Utah at the safety spot, and you get Nate Ritchie still in there too. Those three guys, and Utah probably has another guy coming up in the wings just because Morgan Scalley and Therese Shaw we trust. That's what I always say on the show because they just do a great job helping and developing defensive backs. I think the safety room is in a really good position, and because of the limp, Johnson still getting acclimated, Evans still just seeing a little bit more time. I'm really excited about the Utah defensive backfield, particularly the safeties in 25.
Absolutely. I think the safety room is a room that I don't think we'll ever have to be concerned about for Utah. Even when they lose big names like Cole Bishop or a Vaki to the NFL draft, they already have the replacements ready to go. Tao Johnson is an interesting one because he was playing cornerback and then got moved back to that safety position, and we heard about it. We heard about it all during spring camp about how much he was impressing at safety, and then you put him in game scenarios, and yes, you mentioned it. There were some tackles where that probably could have been better, or some missed tackles that should have been made in certain games, but Johnson has an incredible upside and a lot of potential, and I'm very excited to see him come back, as well as Nate Ritchie, who I thought also last season looked pretty well.
Yeah, Nate Ritchie did a lot of positive things for Utah. He's someone that's trending upwards and getting better since he was good before his mission and then left. And the last few years, he's kind of slowly been getting better back to the Nate Ritchie we all know and love. Rabbit Evans is another guy, though. Let's not forget, he started at Blinn College from the 22-23 season. So last year was his junior season. He was actually ranked the 6th JUCO safety by 27 Sports when he hit the portal. So then came to Utah, played 11 games, got better as the season went on against Iowa State, had 12 tackles. So showed some good promise, showed some signs. Another player trending upwards like Tao Johnson. I do think Johnson and Evans have a chance to be one of the best safety duos in the Big 12 in 2025. So excited to see them, and just excited to have Utah football, just to hear they're back working out. I mean, that shows you as well, every college is obviously doing it right, but it is just that reminder of how much time, energy, and effort these players put into this program to try and deliver the best product they absolutely can and get back to that Big 12 championship level aspiration. So I'm excited to see if Utah is going to be able to do it. Just like Alex, is always exciting whenever you make the time to stop by us. Appreciate you coming on, my friend. If people want to keep up with all the latest of your work, where do they need to head over to?
Absolutely. You can find everything and everything that I put out on my social medias at Napoles Alex. You can see that just right under there. Find me on X, find me on Instagram. And of course, you can follow all of our content at KSL Sports and on KSLSports.com.
Find Alex calling some high school basketball games too.
Absolutely.
And if you want to watch the best high school basketball in the state of Utah, don't go to a Utah basketball game. You could probably be better off going to a Utah high school basketball game right now.
Hey, there is a lot of really good talent at the high school level here in the state of Utah. It has gotten better and better every year that I have done it. I'm sure JT, you can agree with me. The talent every year just gets better and better. Same thing can be said about football. And so don't knock high school sports. So support your local teams.
Exactly. I loved covering high school sports in Utah. I think they're fantastic. That's why I continue to monitor them. And recruiting the state is paramount to being a successful program for any sport too. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So make sure you guys check out the high school scene. Alex, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
It's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you talking the latest in recruiting and just Utah football in general on tomorrow's show. We hope to see you then.